Welcome to the Morning Report, a production of FightBackMedia.com, the number one source of urban conservative information in America.
All right, hey everybody. My name is Willie Lawson. Welcome to the Morning Report. The Morning Report is a production of FightBackMedia.com, 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 and FightBackMediaTV.com. We are thrilled that you are with us today. Today, we're going to do a pretty deep dig into the Illinois public school crisis, where there are 67 schools reported with zero student proficiency in math and 32 schools with zero students reading at grade level. Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? 67 schools across Illinois where they don't have one single student proficient in math. 32 schools across the state with no students that are reading at grade level. None? Wow. This is a mess. All right, let's go ahead and get this started. Here are some of the raw numbers. Let's just get to the facts, because there's a lot of emotion that gets tied up into this, and there's a lot of people who get their liver in a quiver about this or that. Let's start with the facts. Illinois has 4,408 public schools, according to the NCES. Of those, 67 schools are reported zero math proficiency. 32 schools reported zero reading proficiency. And another 408 schools had less than 10% of students reading at grade level. And another 873 schools that had 10% or fewer proficient in mathematics. These numbers aren't from a third world nation. They're from the 2023 Illinois State Board of Education report. So this information isn't from some conservative think tank. This is not from the Cato Institute. This is not from Heritage Foundation or townhall.com or Breitbart or Fox News. This information I'm giving you is coming directly from the Illinois State Board of Education report card. And this isn't just a blip. This is an epidemic. And it's not about resources. It's about priorities. Because the first thing we're going to talk about is the money myth. Well, we need to spend more money on schools. Illinois spends $24,132 per student per year, compared to a national average of $15,633 per student. Illinois spends a third more. Are you kidding? Spends $9,000 more per student. In Chicago public schools, some of the worst performing schools spend over $52,000 per student. Now, the teacher's salary in Illinois is $75,978. The average salary is about $75,000. And that's higher than the national average. So where's all the extra money going? I'll tell you where. Voter bureaucracy, political programming, and failed policies, and failed priorities. So it's not money. Think about it. Think about where you live. And could you send your kid to a decent private school for $25,000 a year? Heck, You can send your kid to college for $25,000 a year. Now, I don't know if it pays for daycare, but daycare is very expensive. But you can send your kid to college on $24,000 a year. State school for sure. How about $52,000 in some of these schools in the Chicago public schools area districts? 52,000. There aren't many schools. There aren't many schools. Not many universities. Not many private schools that you wouldn't be able to reach with 52 grand a year. So I'm thinking that it's not money. So while teachers are doing the best they can, of course, the system is spending more on administrative offices, DEI audits, than actual instructional outcomes. Now, I know we don't want to talk about outcome-based education, but you know what? Do you know who is stuck in that dynamic, in that paradigm? Students. Students are stuck in that outcome-based paradigm. Because if the final product that they produce isn't good enough, then the goal, the graduation, the mortarboard, the gown, the diploma, they don't get. They don't get to say they graduated from high school, even after 12 years in your system. Sometimes 13 years in their system if they start off, or 14 if they start off in pre-K and then kindergarten and then 1 through 12. 1 through 12, kindergarten, pre-K, or Head Start. That's a long time in your system. And if they're not able to produce the product at the end, then they don't get the prize. This is why the students in this particular instance, in these particular cases, have been abandoned. Imagine being 13 years old, 7th grade, and never having read a full paragraph confidently. Not because you're not smart. It's because the system that you're in, the school system that you're in, never gave you the tools. 13 years old and you've never read a full paragraph confidently. These children have been betrayed by school boards, unions, politicians, and yes, even parents to a degree, who've been misled by a broken system. The result? Generations who are functionally illiterate and mathematically paralyzed in a world that runs on information. Now, here is the cultural, what we're going to call the cultural corruption of education. We've got to say it out loud. When education stops being about reading, writing, and arithmetic, it starts being about ideology, identity, and bureaucratic expansion. And when that happens, kids lose. I'll say it again. When education stops being about reading, writing, and arithmetic, and starts being about ideology, identity, and bureaucratic expansion, children lose. And these are not accidents. These are consequences of intentional policy choices that favor political messaging over measurable achievement. And who pays the price? Well, not the superintendent with a 6-figure salary. Not the consultants. The children do. Here's our agenda. Here's what we must do. Here at Fight Back Media especially, and hopefully you will take on this agenda. First, expose the truth. Share these numbers, talk about them, and don't let the media memory hold them. Yeah, this this stuff kind of pops up sometime, and then it goes away. Sort of pops up, and then goes away. Push school choice where you live. I've said this in previous videos, and I'm going to say it in this one. One of the things that the urban mom has in common with the suburban mom is they want the best educational venue for their kid. They want their kid to have the best thing that they can afford to give them. They want them to have the best educational environment, best educational venue that they possibly can. That's the mindset that the urban mom and the suburban mom have in common. The suburban mom may indeed have the resources to do a number of things. They could attend the public school if the public school is where they live, is to their standard. And a lot of times they've moved to those neighborhoods specifically because the public school was, quote, a good school, end quote. Right? And if that doesn't fit their needs, they may be able to have the resources to send their kid to another school, whether it be a private school or parochial school. Right? In a lot of places, and Illinois is one of them, the choice of being able to send a kid in a failing school, a school that has, for the past few years, have had 0 kids reading at grade level. 0. Think about the kids stuck in that school. And the parents unable to move them. Even to another public school. I'll tell you, here's the dirty little secret. A lot of school districts will play games with school choice. They don't want you to move schools. They don't. They don't. If it isn't one of their choices, they want you to stay in the school that you've been assigned to. Even back in the day, and I'll say back in the day because it's been a while since my kid was in school, when we moved from a Christian school to the public school district, we found out, and I heard this from a principal, the principal that eventually was the principal where my kid went to school eventually. She told us up front, when you apply for special assignment, the first thing they're going to tell you is no. Because my kid was assigned to B school over here, B school, not a B-rated school, but B school, and I wanted him to go to A school. So the first thing they told us was no, he's scheduled to go over here. He should go over here. I'm like, for all sorts of reasons, I don't want him to go over here. I want him to go over here. The principal of this school was a friend of mine, and I talked to her, and she said, they're going to tell you no the first time, and they may tell you no the second time. She promised me if she got the call, that she would take him. She would say it was okay. It wasn't like A school was overcrowded. The opposite of that, really. And it wasn't like B school didn't have enough kids. The opposite of that, really. But for all sorts of reasons, I needed him to go to A school. So they play games with all that to start with, making it difficult for parents to actually choose the school, even inside their own system, that parents would think that is better for their kid. Now, of course, if you're supposed to go to B school, then they'll provide transportation. But if you want to go to A school, even if it's closer, and this was a choice, this was a thing here, you have to provide your own transportation, which makes it very tough for a lot of urban moms and urban families to decide, oh, we're going to make sure that we get our kid to a school that's better than zero reading at grade level. So they make it hard. They make it hard to give the parents the power to get out of failing schools. Here's what else we have to do. We have to demand transparency. Where is the money going? Why aren't results being delivered? For instance, parents go to school board meetings all the time for all sorts of reasons to complain about everything. To complain that they don't get, the passing periods aren't long enough and their kids aren't getting to go to the bathroom enough, or that there's not enough water fountains, or the school lunches taste like cardboard, or whatever. We need to see more parents show up at school board meetings and ask that question. My kid is at XYZ elementary school, and the report card says that not one of these kids is reading at grade level. How is that even possible? How do we have a school of 800 kids? Let's say you have a big elementary school, 800 kids, that nobody's reading at grade level, or no one's proficient in math. How's that even possible? Or the 873 schools that less than 10% of them are proficient in math, or less than 10% of them are efficient in reading. How's that even possible? Parents, you need to go to these school board meetings, and these are the questions that you need to ask. Number 4, we need to cut out the ideological fluff. Bring schools back to the basics. Phonics. Teach phonics. We have a phonetic alphabet. We have a phonetic language. English is a phonetic language. Teach it. It's not new. It's not shiny. But it works. Arithmetic. Now I know, like a lot of you will say, what about math? Arithmetic. Arithmetic is computation. Computation. Before I get to the next one on number 4, let me relate a story. Golly, when you get older and you've done this stuff, you have stories. When I started working in the school district, I worked in a place called the Instructional Resource Classroom, and I was an assistant teacher, and what we did in the Instructional Resource Classroom, the IRC, is that we designed lessons and designed the curriculum around students' individual learning styles. If they were kinetic, the idea is that, sometimes, the teacher just droning on at the board. If the kid has auditory problems, they were off and running, right? So you couldn't do that with every kid, and maybe you needed a small group. Maybe you needed a game or some other way to get a concept taught. Yeah. But what I learned in the math instructional resource classroom was that certain students just needed practice. Now, a lot of that mentality from my heart came from being a musician, that we could get it if I had time to practice it. You ever wonder why math teachers give so much homework? You ever wonder that when your kid comes home, if they got homework, they always have math homework? Because math teachers understand it just takes practice. I found a book when amongst all the stuff, the resources that we had in that classroom, and it was a little blue book. I wish I still had it. It was about this thin, about this big, and it said practice, practice, practice. And it had hundreds, maybe 2,000 practice questions of 1 digit addition, two-digit over one digit, division problems, just page after page of just practice, getting good at it. Computation. Now I know a lot of you can say, we've moved beyond computation, but you can't move beyond computation because computation still happens. Whether it's behind the scenes in a algebraic function, computation still happens. And you have to get good at computation early. That's back to arithmetic. And it helps later in critical thinking, which is the third part. Cut all the ideological stuff, cut the EI stuff, cut all that other stuff out. Just worry about reading, phonics, arithmetic, and critical thinking. Folks, this is a 5-alarm fire. We don't need any more smoke detectors. We need water. We need real reform, real accountability. So let's take all this a step farther. What do solutions look like? Let's start rebuilding the trust between schools and families. What that means, what that looks like, is a mandatory back to basics curriculum for at least K through 5. And that's when you learn to read. That's when you learn to compute. And some of that computation needs to be mental math, because that's how you get the critical thinking. And that's how you get the practice. Especially 3rd grade. One more story. While I was there, my first teaching assignment, whenever I would have a problem, a discipline problem with a student, mostly the first year, because you suck. As a first year teacher, you suck. Because think about it, the kids, I worked in a junior high school. The kids had been doing the whole school thing for 8 years. This was my first year. They were 7 years ahead of me. So you're not very good. But I had a really good friend in the guidance department, and I went to her, and she said, and I asked, well, what should I do? And she said, well, let's look at their cumulative file. I don't even think teachers can do that anymore. But she said, let's take a look at their cum file. We call it a cumulative file. That's your permanent record. And what I noticed was the students that I had the most trouble with, or we had the most trouble with in our classroom, their reading scores went this way in 3rd grade. Push. And the students that either we didn't have or were doing well, we weren't having trouble with, they were reading at grade level at 3rd grade. Believe it or not, we had 9th graders, because we had junior high school, 7 through 9, that were effectively freshmen in high school that weren't reading at a 4th grade level. That was back, golly, a long time ago. So it's been happening for a while. So those were our kids who had discipline problems, right? Those were the bad kids. No, those were the kids who couldn't read. Ta-da! That's why somebody's got to decide, we're going to go back to a no fluff, results oriented, back to basics curriculum for at least K through 5. Not many professions allow people to be bad at their jobs and get paid for 30 years and collect a pension. Education does. You can't even be the manager of a Burger King and lose money for 30 years. Hell, 30 months. and in some places, not even 30 days. Can't be can't be the manager of a Burger King and get away with that, but you can in schools. So school leaders need to be fired. Yes, fired. They need to be sat down and told, this is not a job for you. If they preside over a multi-year zero proficiency zone. We don't want them teaching you the test. I don't give a rat's ass about teaching you the test. What I care about is, can the students read? If you've got not one of your kids in your school that's reading at grade level, not one? Not one? Yeah, it may be hard. It may be tough. You may be in a really tough area. I get it. But year after year, 1, 2, 3, 4 years, you got nobody reading at grade level? Not even by frickin' accident? I don't want to hear that crap. I'm going to get somebody in there who can. Go make a difference. For the kids. Now, we also need a moratorium on social experiments in public schools. This idea that, and if you've worked in school districts, you know that every new idea that comes out of the ivory towers of the schools of education get tried in your school. Now, what also happens is that school districts allow their kids to be guinea pigs for the money. We're going to get a grant, and we'll get a grant, and we'll get new computers, and we'll get if we run this program. No. We're too busy trying to teach our kids to read using something that we know that works. Not some experimental thing. Not some person who is working on their doctorate at the local university. I ain't got time for that. Because what we know is that phonics works. It's not flashy, it's not pretty, it's not shiny, but it works. We're trying to get our kids to learn how to read. Not just to have at least one kid being able to read at grade level, but because we know that it is fundamental in their life. What else we need to do? We need to empower communities. Local school boards that reflect the values of the families they serve. And unfortunately, the only way they can reflect the values that if people who have children in these districts show up at their meetings and say, y'all are getting it wrong. Now, when we did that, a few years ago, the federal government started looking at these parents showing up at school board meetings as somehow domestic terrorists. Because they would go to these meetings and they were pissed. They were pissed that their little girls were having to dress out in their PE uniforms in front of little boys. They were having to share bathrooms with little boys, and they were pissed. Because that wasn't the values that they held. And they were dubbed as domestic terrorists. That crap's got to stop. Elected officials who treat education as a life or death issue is something we've got to have. The elected officials of school boards and the like, people who are in charge of school districts, need to treat this stuff like it is real. Let me tell you how a lot of them think. A lot of them think that, when parents complain, especially at the high school level, that it's only a matter of time before their student graduates one way or the other or drops out. And then that complaining parent is out and we don't have to worry about them anymore. They're all of the mentality, this too will pass. These people won't be around forever. As long as I can get to my next term, they'll be good. So if we've got multi-generational or multi-year failure, it is up to every parent at every grade level, at every level, to make sure that these elected officials know that this issue is not going away, and they'll go away first. They'll lose their position first, because this is a life or death issue. This is a life or death issue. And we need a media who is willing to report failure without spinning it as progress through struggle. Failure is failure. 873 schools that have no math proficiency, that's failure straight up. Failure. Yes, and everybody is involved in that failure. The system, the school districts, the people who write the curriculum, the people who deliver the curriculum, the teachers, the principals, the teacher unions that protect bad teachers, parents, and even the students at some level. Yes. Failure is failure. Say it out loud. Don't make excuses for it. Somebody's got to stand up and be responsible. Folks, we're not asking for miracles. We're demanding competence. Reading and math are not controversial. They're foundational. And if a system cannot deliver the foundations, it doesn't deserve your trust or your tax dollars. Now, if some of these things shook you up, good. You should have. So it's time to stop pretending the system just needs more time, or the system just needs more money. We need to care about education more. We need to pay more taxes. We need to pay our teachers better. What it needs is a reckoning. And that's up to you. Again, I'm Willie Lawson. This has been the Morning Report from FightBackMedia.com, 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 and FightBackMediaTV.com. Listen, folks, share this video. Subscribe on Rumble and YouTube. And look for the audio version on Spreaker and Spotify and iHeart Radio. Because we out here. Until next time, stay alert, stay informed, and always fight back. We'll see you when we see you. Bye-bye now.